Greetings, adventurers! You're listening to the Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood with me, Professor Atwood. I'm glad you're here, and I can't wait to tell you about my latest journey. So please, settle in, relax, and prepare to quietly drift off with me to parts known, unknown, and even some places in between. Comfortable? Very well. Let's get underway. Welcome back, adventurers. Okay, Episode 5. I know we're still just getting started, but you've probably noticed that the adventures don't always have consistent lengths. That's true. That's just the nature of adventuring. Some will be shorter, some will be longer. It's not really up to me so much, but it's more about what's in store for me. And let's be honest, who among us really knows what's in store for us? I mean, we can talk time travel and possibly visiting the future, but then you have time paradoxes and other time-related anomalies, and you can also run afoul of inclement time weather. I hinted about that earlier. Nothing is predictable, and nothing is a guarantee, even if you could see into the future. I mean, what you're ultimately seeing is a possible future, and one you may have altered just by looking at it. Kind of like a time variant of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. I think ultimately you need to take the fluidity and linear nature of time with a grain of science salt. If you get too bogged down in the mechanics, you risk losing the bigger picture. I mean, time is like one of those magic eye paintings that was popular a while back. You can only see the whole thing if you look at it from a specific angle and from a specific distance. And sometimes, no matter how hard some people try, they can never see it. Sometimes it's more important to peer into the present to really see what's going on in front of you, which is what I'll be looking for on this next journey. So take a step back, broaden your perspective, and when you're dealing with the present, you always want to make sure you can still see the time forest for the time trees. So speaking of trees, I thought I'd go for a solo hike for my next journey. Like I said before, sometimes it's great to have your own crew. Sometimes you get to meet a new crew, like when I boarded Captain Flynn's boat in the Amazon. And sometimes you just like to go it alone. Bradley was going on vacation, so the timing worked out. Now, where does a lab/explorer's assistant go on vacation? I mean, if your job is to pretty much go to exotic places, or at least prepare for someone else to go to exotic places, where do you go to relax? Interestingly, Bradley likes all-inclusive resorts. I don't blame him. The less planning he has to do, the better. It's interesting. Most of these resorts plan all of these activities for you, and he likes to have the option. But mostly, he just wants to go somewhere and have the option of doing things, and then choose not to do them. So I get it. Also, there were no pending experiments, and all of the plants were hibernating, so there really was nothing for him to take care of. I told him to have a great time and take lots of pictures of him not doing anything. But he said that taking pictures was doing something, so he couldn't guarantee it. Fair enough. But before Bradley left, he prepared everything for my journey. I was going to go on a hike. Not just any hike. I was going to Alaska's Tongass National Forest. The Tongass is the nation's largest national forest and covers most of southeast Alaska. It's bordered by the Pacific Ocean on the west and the Coast Mountains and Canadian border on the east, and spans 500 miles of southeast Alaska. It's the largest intact temperate rainforest in the world. Now, Coastal temperate rainforests are rare. At least, of course, like I've said before, the ones you know about. They occur in only about 6 places outside of Alaska. The vast majority of Alaska's coastal temperate rainforests are old growth, which means exactly how it sounds. It consists of western hemlock, Sitka spruce, mountain hemlock, and Alaska yellow cedar. Mature coastal temperate rainforests are extraordinarily complex and stable habitats. Over thousands of years, many wildlife species have evolved to exploit this habitat. Understanding the complexity of this habitat is only now beginning to be understood, and of course, much more scientific study is needed. I mean, it's not really my thing, but I do have some colleagues studying it. But I honestly doubt I'll run into any of them without a helicopter, and I promised myself this was one hike I would not bring the helicopter. At roughly the size of West Virginia, the Tongass National Forest is also the largest national forest in the U.S. and home to approximately 70,000 people living in 32 communities, including the state capital, Juneau. Alaska natives have continuously inhabited the Tongass for more than 10,000 years, residing with salmon, bears, wolves, eagles, and whales. Living from the land is still a way of life there, kind of a tradition and a necessity, since there's plenty of fish and wildlife right in the region. Well, I mean, not all year round, and, once winter hits, things get a little, let's just say, harder to find. And I'll say this, as much as I like hiking, chances are you won't find me in Alaska in the middle of winter. Now, I knew some of the terrain would be a bit unforgiving, so I wanted to make sure I brought everything I needed. Bradley and I upgraded my satellite phone for emergencies, so I shouldn't have trouble getting a signal this time. We got that sorted out from the Amazon. I would be bringing the usual hiking and camping gear: backpack, phone, GPS, rope, analog compass, maps, books on lore about the forest, food, water, first aid kit, bear repellent, a small portable power source, a few changes of clothes, and my portable mandolin. What's great is that it sounds like an actual mandolin, but through remarkable acoustic engineering, it's actually the size of a small ukulele. So I was ready to go. I flew into the Ketchikan airport. Now, that in and of itself was a bit unexpected, because you'd think the Ketchikan airport would be in the town of Ketchikan. It isn't. It's on another island. You have to take a ferry from the airport to actually get to Ketchikan. But once I was there, I took a crisp, clean breath, full of mountain air, and just soaked it in as the water gently broke against the docks. The town was amazing. It's so beautiful. It's like a small western version of a coastal Italian town. You had a port, the city, beautiful trees, and mountains all crammed lovingly into the same space, like everything is fighting to be in the picture you're about to take. It was just what I was hoping for. The town itself had lots of totem poles, great food, and, well, I don't think it's called the salmon capital of the world for nothing. The problem is, I don't like salmon. I know, by now you're probably thinking Professor Atwood is quite a picky eater. And you'd be right. But I will say this. As a picky eater, when you find something that's truly great, you enjoy it all the more. Like when I was in the UK and they served me fish and chips made from a fish I thought was extinct. That sort of thing. So while I passed on the salmon, I had some amazing crab cakes, so dinner turned out just fine. After dinner, I wasn't really ready to turn in yet, so I went to Creek Street and stopped in a club that had live music. It was jazz night, so I was a little worried about sitting in. But then I saw someone had brought a washboard, so I didn't feel odd about it at all. Normally, they don't let washboards and mandolin players sit in, but they seemed to make an exception for me and my new washboard friend Benny. He was actually pretty good. We did a lot of riffing long into the evening, and the jazz trio Running Cod was very magnanimous, as I can't say I'm a professional like they were. Turns out Benny was, though. He was a studio washboard player and was just here on vacation. Now, I was ready to head back to the hotel after that, but Benny suggested we go to the Midnight Lumberjack Show. Turns out there's an actual lumberjack show in Ketchikan, but there's an underground show at midnight just for locals, but Benny said he could get me in. You know, you can't explore without trying new things, so I said sure. So we went through a hidden door at the back of a local tavern and entered a really large room with a pile of sawdust spread out in the center. Now, I'm familiar with the traditional lumberjack competitions, where there is axe throwing, log sawing, log rolling, and log climbing. It's a lot of things to do with logs, basically. But I didn't see anything like that set up here. In fact, there wasn't one log in the room. But the competitors soon arrived and the small crowd cheered. A few people gave Benny and I some subtle annoyed glances, knowing I was an outsider, but Benny assured everyone I was cool. Turns out there were only 2 competitions for the Underground Lumberjack Show. The first was making flapjacks. 2 stoves were wheeled out, and the 2 competitors, after donning hairnets, squared off against each other. I didn't know the competitors' names, so I just referred to them as Big Beard and Little Beard. Both seemed to be local favorites. Big Beard out of the gate definitely had that killer instinct. He really understood flapjacks. I mean, they've been around for centuries. They began over 30,000 years ago, during the Stone Age. Researchers have found pancakes in the stomach of Otzi the Iceman. I mean, that's human remains dating back 5,300 years. It's not easy to figure out what someone ate 5,300 years ago from their remains, but you most likely could make a few educated guesses. Once you ruled out each other, that left red deer, wild goat, and sadly some toxic ferns, which ironically may have preserved the pancake remains. Now, in ancient Greece and Rome, pancakes were made from wheat flour, olive oil, honey, and curdled milk. Ancient Greek poets, Cratinus and Magnus, wrote about pancakes in their poetry. Can you imagine being so infatuated with a food that you write poetry about it? I mean, like I said, I'm a picky eater, so I think the most I would do would be maybe a haiku, but I'd have to be pretty inspired. Now, the name pancake started during the 15th century, but became standard in 19th century America. They were initially called Indian cakes, Johnny cakes, journey cakes, buckwheat cakes, griddle cakes, and of course, flapjacks. Early American pancakes were made with buckwheat or cornmeal. Thomas Jefferson loved them so much, he sent a special recipe to his hometown from the White House. Back to the competition, which was well underway. While Big Beard was off flipping his cakes with all the knowledge of a flapjack historian, Little Beard was still mixing his batter. Soon both were on the griddle and the competition was heating up, so to speak. There were many mix-in options, from blueberries to chocolate chips, all with different point values. Benny told me last week someone got disqualified for making a crepe, but apparently it was delicious, so the judges only banned him for a month. Big Beard was clearly winning, but Little Beard seemed like he had a trick up his sleeve. Soon the pancakes were plated and served to the judges. While the judges did their judging, both contestants went back to the griddles to keep cooking. They made enough flapjacks for everyone, which was a house courtesy of the Underground Lumberjack Show. If I hadn't already had such a great dinner earlier, my mouth would be watering. Those flapjacks smelled so good. But I declined as I was full. Benny wasn't, however, and devoured his pancakes after requesting bananas, almonds, and blackberries in them. And when the judges announced their decision, it was an upset. Little Beard had won. Turns out, Littlebeard had taken his time to get just the right ratio of cornmeal in his flapjack to make a buttermilk Johnny cake hybrid. I wasn't hungry, but I took one with me for later. I felt like this was almost historic, so I didn't want to miss it, even if I was going to enjoy it later. I mean, I like pancakes, but I don't think even Littlebeard's hybrid surprise was going to get me to writing haikus, but we'll see. Now it was time for the second competition, and it was true, honest-to-goodness bear wrestling. Now, conventional wisdom says that this is dangerous, and let's be honest, insane, for both the lumberjack and the bear. It turns out they only use brown bears, and they are willing participants, which also seems to get around local ordinances. The brown bears are then compensated with the backpacks of inexperienced campers who ran away at the first sign of trouble out in the Tongass National Forest. It's an agreement that apparently has lasted for over 100 years. I asked about the grizzly bears, and Benny, the crowd, and even the brown bears laughed. Turns out everyone knows you can't trust a grizzly. Even if one agreed to the terms of the competition, he would most likely turn on you in an instant, and with his grizzly friends, set up an ambush for the lumberjack show, just in order to get all the backpacks at once. Now, Big Beard and Little Beard each squared off against a brown bear. They had taken their flannel and suspenders off and greased themselves up with Emperor Goose fat, which was also tradition. This is another reason the competition was in this order, as the goose fat was extremely flammable, so for safety reasons, it couldn't be within 20 feet of a gas pancake griddle. Clearly, both Big Beard and Little Beard were veterans, and so were the bears, it seemed. Neither gave ground, and as soon as one human or bear was about to be pinned, they found a way to reverse the hold. The use of teeth was prohibited for either species, so everyone expected a fair fight. The match went back and forth for a while with half Nelsons, full Nelsons, and of course bear hugs, which look a lot different when they're literal. But sure enough, exhaustion was beginning to set in, and eventually the bears were getting tired. While both Big Beard and Little Beard pinned their bears, Big Beard was just a little quicker and won the match. Bear wrestling is weighted a bit more heavily than flapjack, so adding up the bonus points for being evenly coated with Emperor Goose fat, Big Beard took the show. The audience just erupted in applause. I couldn't tell which one was the favorite over both being local favorites, but they just were excited that someone won, I think. But the bears really didn't seem to care either way, and they were compensated equally, win or lose, per their agreement. One judge raised the arm of Big Beard, while another brought out backpacks for the bears, who accepted them and went back into the wilderness. By then, Benny and I were both spent. We said our goodbyes and wished each other well. He had to get on a flight the next day for another studio session with a famous artist I had never heard of, and I had to get started on my hike. I got a good night's sleep, and the next day I was up and raring to go. I was ready to enter the Tongass National Forest. I mean, I didn't have to go very far. I was pretty much right there. If something is 16.7 million acres, it's kind of hard to miss. Now, I knew where I needed to go, so as I started, I checked all of my global positioning and was on track. I do want to say one thing about exploring and camping alone. I don't recommend it. Sure, I do it all the time, but I have a fair amount of safeguards and fail-safes in place. Redundant backup communication systems, health monitoring and tracking, even if Bradley's on vacation. But even with all those precautions, there is still a risk. So I'm just saying minimize yours by bringing a buddy. Last time I went hiking, I ran across another solo hiker who had set up camp. He brought his dog with him, who looked a little disoriented. He brought his dog with him, but apparently he did not bring a shirt. We waved at each other, and then he went back to smoking something that wasn't tobacco and speaking with his confused dog. I'm just saying there are safer ways to camp. So I walked slowly into the forest. I started on a well-worn trail, but then soon went off into some of the lesser-known trails, including one that's not on the maps. As I walked deeper into the forest, the tree canopy above me got thicker, and I knew I was quickly leaving the modern world behind. Now, it's not like the Amazon rainforest where every sound reminds you that there is life teeming in every square inch of the place. Here in Alaska, everyone and everything gets a little more room. It was quiet. I felt the gentle breeze with a hint of coolness to it. I heard birds chirp overhead as smaller animals scurried across the ground or up and down trees. A black-tailed deer looked at me lazily, sizing me up, and then went about his business looking for a natural salt lick. Here's an interesting thing. Deer don't really like man-made salt licks. However, we often see deer using them. Why? Because they don't want us to feel bad about putting them up. They appreciate the effort, but often don't feel they're completely necessary. Deer feel if they have to work a little harder to find salt, it's not a big deal. I mean, they have bigger things to worry about, like bears, hunters, and winter. Now, this was my favorite part of hiking: the quiet, the solitude, and taking the path less traveled. Now, I never really told you where in the forest I was headed, but here's the thing. I may have hinted at a destination, but I'm going to leave this one as a surprise. You'll know when we get there, I assure you. For now, I'll just say I would indeed be peering into the present. I crossed many streams filled with salmon and began to climb up a steep mountain. I found the path I was looking for and soon was at the top. The view was incredible. I was almost 200 feet above sea level. The air was the crispest and cleanest I've ever breathed, and I've breathed a lot of air in various elevations. I mean, you have the obvious reasons, like I was miles from anything man-made that had a smokestack. But people forget that the air we breathe all over the world, most of it comes from forests like these. Plants release oxygen to the atmosphere and absorb carbon dioxide. The process is called photosynthesis, as I'm sure you're aware. Plants, algae, and some bacteria use the sun's energy to create organic matter. Photosynthetic life forms use the light energy to transform carbon dioxide and water into sugar and oxygen. That's why plants and algae are crucial to the Earth's biosphere, because they regulate the atmosphere's oxygen content. Thankfully, the plants and trees don't seem to mind doing this. So think of a forest as a pure air oxygen factory. The closer you are to the source, the better it smells. I mean, a Maine lobster will never taste quite as good eaten anywhere outside of Maine. But at the end of the day, it's still a lobster. You're going to enjoy it to some degree either way. So standing on the top of the mountain in the middle of a natural air factory, I let my lungs slowly fill with something special. The pure air, the pure breeze, and the beautiful view all gave me a deep sense of comfort and of serenity. I sat there for hours, taking it all in, and even watched the sunset. The colors of the sunset over the forest are different than watching it over the ocean. And I'll tell you this though, they are both something to behold. Every sunset, I'm going to probably make this point multiple times, every sunset is different depending where you are and when you are and what you end up observing from what angle. All of those things, every variable is a factor, and when you get to that sunset, that perfect one, it's interesting. You think it's the perfect one until you see the next one. So sunsets are something to behold. And this one, I'll tell you, it was pretty spectacular. But as you can imagine, the forest sunset has a bit more earth tones, but both are warm and soothing. It doesn't really matter where you're watching the sunset. It's going to be amazing, and it's going to be, I hate to use the words again, but warm and soothing every time. After watching the sunset, it was time to make camp. Now, normally, you should have your entire camp set up before dark. Look, I'll be honest here. As a scientist and an explorer, I'm not the best at what people call roughing it. Sometimes it's necessary, but when it isn't necessary, it becomes a choice. And I often choose not to do it. So I did what I normally do and had my campsite airlifted in about 2 hours ago while I was enjoying the sunset. I use a mix of drone technology, GPS positioning, and I also have subcontracted deals with all of the air traffic controllers at the Ketchikan airport. I mean, it's just Steve and Bill, but they know the drill, and when I need full excavating or spelunking gear, or even a whole team, they're on it. But tonight, it was a simple airdrop of an inflatable climate-controlled tent and a portable biodegradable fire pit of my own design, and a chef-prepared meal of fresh salmon cakes, which of course included baked Alaska for dessert with extra meringue. Now, I'd asked the chef if that was really appropriate, because the name Baked Alaska was actually coined at Antoine's, a restaurant in New Orleans, Louisiana, by its chef de cuisine, Antoine Alciatore, in 1867, to honor the acquisition by the United States of Alaska from the Russian Empire on March 10th that year. He said that it was just a dessert and that I shouldn't really read too much into it. He offered me the creme brulee as a substitute, but I stuck with the baked Alaska, regardless of its origins. Now, after dinner, I sat up and read for a bit in the light of my custom fire pit. I adjusted the flame and assembled my portable mandolin. I started playing freestyle. Now, there's something about playing a mandolin in the middle of a forest that really makes you feel like you've gone back in time. I felt like I was camping out in an enchanted forest full of mysteries and secrets. I mean, I knew I wasn't, at least not on this trip, but it felt good. I felt the music, and maybe the forest even felt it too. I don't know. Like maybe some connected primal memory from an earlier time and place was being remembered by the trees, or the network of trees. Just, and they were thinking about a time that maybe when a jester got thrown out of a traveling minstrel caravan for possibly having the plague. But really, the other performers just didn't think he was funny. So I also put up a salt lick for the black-tailed deer. Sometimes I like an audience for my playing, and sometimes I don't. I knew the deer would come to the salt lick out of a courtesy, even though I know deer are ambivalent towards string instruments. It also gave me a chance to view the wildlife without having to get up from my comfortable hydraulic camping chair. I was a little disappointed as only a few deer came, and I feel like the rest had made up an excuse to not use the salt lick or hear my performance. I closed my performance with a song I was working on about an enchanted castle floating in the sky over a rainbow, but I always get stuck trying to justify the light being refracted by water droplets to form the rainbow, and how it would actually hold up the castle. After my performance, the few deer that showed up felt that courtesy and honor had been satisfied, and gave me a nod as they trotted off into the woods. I was getting pretty tired, and it was time to turn off the fire pit and get some sleep. I didn't bother with a sleeping bag, only extra blankets, as the tent itself was climate controlled and came with an inflatable bed built into the floor. Now, I know it sounds like I don't like communing with nature if I'm using all this technology to make myself comfortable, but I disagree. I love being outdoors, and I love nature. I just don't want beetles crawling all over my face when I sleep. That's all. So, the next morning, I set out to do what I traveled here to do, visit a glacier up close. But before I left, I wanted to make sure the campsite was completely taken care of, so I programmed the drone to pick everything up and also take a picture and also disinfect the area. So I figured, when you camp, leave the area even better than how you found it. So I think that's a good rule for camping. So I was going to go visit a glacier, but more specifically, I was going to visit a special glacier that was quite different from all the others. Now, continental ice sheets shaped the landscape of southeastern Alaska over millions of years. The slow-moving ice carved deep fjords, created mountain summits, and transported tons of sediment and debris onto the landscape. So the glaciers really did shape Alaska. Many of the Tongass glaciers empty into a glacial lake or a river flowing from under the ice that eventually reaches the sea. Now, ice breaking off from glaciers and crashing into the sea is called calving. Glaciers that calve directly into the sea are known as tidewater glaciers. There are a lot of glaciers in the Tongass National Forest, but like I said, I was looking for one in particular. First of all, you could get to it by land. I didn't have a boat with me, obviously, and some of these glaciers are only accessible by boat. The glacier I wanted was near the South Sawyer Glacier, but further east. It's interesting, the mountain goats on the South Sawyer Glacier make a lot of noise, as if they're angry with the glacier, but they seem to get it all sorted out, and they lost interest in being angry with the glacier soon enough. They quieted down. But I made it to the glacier I was looking for. It was a small glacier, so no one really seemed to bother with it. I got all the way up to the face of it, and it was like looking into a giant, icy mirror. It reflected my image back at me, and at the same time, I feel like the world was also being reflected in that ice. Where we've been and where we're going. Time slowed down, even the reflection began to shimmer and slow. I had found what I was looking for. I had found the Soul Glacier of the Tongass National Forest. It's a very, very special glacier steeped in history and mysticism. No one's quite sure how it works. I mean, I have some theories. You see, glacial ice often appears blue when it has become very dense and free of bubbles. Years of compression gradually makes the ice denser over time, forcing out tiny air pockets between crystals. When glacier ice becomes extremely dense, the ice absorbs a small amount of red light, leaving a bluish tint in the reflected light, which is what we see. When glacier ice is white, that usually means that there are many tiny air bubbles still in the ice. My theory is that every air bubble here in the Soul Glacier actually contains a memory and an insight. Anyone who has ever been here, from the people of the First Nations to Canadian tourists who can't quite seem to get enough of winter, the Soul Glacier stores these, mixes them together, and over hundreds of years and millions of bubbles, the Soul Glacier has become a spiritual supercomputer, for lack of a better term. You see, the Soul Glacier peers into you, finds a memory, makes a copy to store in its ice-air bubble matrix, then gives you an insight in return. Well, that's kind of where it gets a little murky. There's some debate over this. I mean, it's possible the Soul Glacier, after much reflecting into its enchanted, icy facade, lets you pick your own insight. That's kind of the one I believe, actually. As I stared into the icy wall, I saw many shimmering colors and many reflections, some of me and some I didn't recognize. Now, like I said, it's a small glacier, but when you're staring deep into it, it looks like it can go on forever. And inside, it really seems to do just that. As I stared into the glacier and at my reflection at the same time, a sense of peace washed over me. The Soul Glacier was saying, "I see you," but not in a creepy way. More in the way a parent speaks to a child. I mean, it was a little condescending, but the glacier's been around for a while and has earned it, so it didn't really bother me. I saw myself, and like most people, the first thing I saw were the flaws and what I've done wrong and things I would have done differently. Like maybe work at NASA right after my first PhD instead of exploring underground ruins in the Middle East for a year. It set my own rocket propulsion systems back at least 2 years. But, water under the science bridge, I suppose. When you look at yourself, you need to see the whole package. And the Soul Glacier is pretty insistent about that. I saw the good and the bad. I saw the achievements and the setbacks. The successful experiments and the cesium explosions. The Soul Glacier wanted me to see it all, and I did. And I got my insight. It was this: when you look in the mirror, there is always going to be room for improvement. Respect that, take it to heart, but at the same time, be generous with yourself, and know that knowledge and improvement are lifelong pursuits. No one is ever done early when seeking knowledge and improvement. I have to say, I was spent after that. And to make things more interesting, it had started to snow, which was very unusual for that time of year. I had a feeling the Soul Glacier had something to do with it. But it's always good to be prepared, so Bradley had a dog sled team standing by, and they were just as surprised as I was that I actually needed them. I took the dog sled back to Ketchikan, and I have to say it wasn't as fun as I thought it would be. First of all, 3 of the dogs didn't get along, and then midway through the trip a rabbit ran past. Sure, that got them all on the same page, and we were off in the wrong direction until I could get control of things again. That delayed me for almost 2 hours as I tried to get the bickering and now disappointed dogs back on track. But soon I was back in Ketchikan, and I just made the ferry back to the airport. It was time to go home. When I got back, I had a CD waiting in the mail for me from Benny. He had sent me his Washboard solo CD. It sounded pretty good. I can see why he's in demand. I sat down in my recliner, thinking about where I had been. I mostly thought about the Soul Glacier and what I had seen. Not just what was inside, but what it had reflected back at me. It was giving me a gentle reminder like, here you are, right here and now, and this is who you are at this very moment. I think that stuck with me the most. The trip home gave me more time to think and get some more clarity on what the Soul Glacier was trying to show me. Man-made mirrors reflect us in a more manufactured way. Honestly, I think mine always shows me a little thinner than I really am, so I'm grateful for that. But when nature makes a mirror, it reflects something deeper, and it's something to pay attention to. It tells us to look deeper than our reflection, and that it's in our nature to be curious, to explore and to learn, and then with that knowledge, be a better person. I got it. I was grateful for the journey, and grateful for the insight. Thank you, adventurers, and keep exploring. Good night. Okay, so you guys want even more and an exclusive look at my weekly journal, please join the White Cat Adventurers Club. You'll get something special, too. You'll get a soundscape of every episode. Think of it as a blank adventure canvas for your ears and mind. So you'll get added music, sound effects, and ambient noise. So you can create your own adventure story in your mind as you drift off to sleep. But there's other exclusives there too, like updates from White Cat Entertainment, and also another show called What Are You Watching, in case you are watching things. Please go to patreon.com/whitecatentertainment. That's patreon.com/whitecatentertainment.
The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood was created, written, and performed by Chris Mancini and produced by White Cat Entertainment. It is a work of fiction. Maybe. Music and sound design by Ron Tansky at rontanskymusic.com. For more info and merchandise, go to whitecatentertainment.com.